Welcome everyone to the Laurel and Hardy Forum podcast, or as we like to say, Pod-the-Cast. I wonder where that came from. I'm your host, Mike David, and it's great to have all of you here with us. I'm in a sort of a soundproof studio somewhere here in the States, and as you can see behind me, we are getting ready later on to perhaps audition a new drummer. We are really pleased to have with us as our first guest, Mr. Bernie Hogya. Bernie is the creator of the very popular website lettersfromstan.com, which now showcases over 700, I believe it is, documents related to Stan Laurel. So with that in mind, Bernie, we welcome you here as the forum's very first guest on the podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be your first guest.
Many members of the forum, Bernie, have indicated through messages that they have posted on the forum as to how fascinated they are with everything that is to be found at the site. It certainly is a very vast and varied collection. To start us off, would you give us some background as to how you first got started in setting up this special project?
I've always been a history buff, and a few years ago I took a trip to Athens to visit the Parthenon. And I remember walking up the seemingly thousands of steps to the top, and it was an unbearably hot day in the summer, 97 degrees, maybe 100 degrees. And as we got to the top, and you're looking at this magnificent wonder of the world, the Parthenon, right in front of you. Classical Greek architecture, one of the most amazing things you can see in the world. I remember overhearing a couple arguing near me, and they were saying this: "Okay, we've seen it. Let's go. Oh my God, it's so hot. Please, let's go down." And as they were saying this to one another, I remember at that exact moment, I was looking down at the ground. I was looking at the stones that were beneath my feet, thinking to myself that these stones had been there for thousands of years. On this very spot where I was standing, right here, right now, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, right here, right now, right where I'm standing. That to me is history come to life. What I wanted to do with Letters from Stan is I wanted to bring history to life for fans of Laurel and Hardy. And the way I'm doing that is through Stan's own words. You can read lots of books about Laurel and Hardy, and there are some really fine books written about Laurel and Hardy. But as far as I know, Stan never wrote his autobiography. But when you read the letters that Stan wrote on the website, you're reading Stan's own words, things that he believed in, things that he remembered, people that he met, events that he couldn't forget. You're hearing it all from his own mouth, right from his own typewriter, his own words. And I think that that's what makes it a marvel. Stan was a very, very interesting man. And I think his words make it much more interesting. It brings history to life. And it makes Stan a more human comedian.
There are some really interesting revelations to be found in a number of the letters. For example, in a 1936 letter to actress Betty Healy, Stan writes that he could be impulsive at times and afterwards regrets what he has said. Are there any revelations, Bernie, in the letters that you've come across that really stand out?
Well, Mike, there are a great many revelations in the letters that Stan has written over his lifetime. And in answer to your question, rather than just cherry pick a letter or two, I would suggest that everybody just delve in and start reading. Think of it as a good novel. Read it from cover to cover. And I'm sure that there'll be something in there for you. You'll learn a little bit about Stan's life from his own perspective, growing up in England. You'll also get a good taste of Stan's wit and personality. He not only had an incredible sense of humor on screen, he had an incredible sense of humor off screen. And I think the letters humanize Stan to a large degree and make him much more flesh and bones, but at the same time endear him to you, not only as a personality, but also as a man.
And it seems that Stan wrote quite a few letters to the actress Betty Healy. There's quite a number of them on the site. Do you have any indication from the material that you have as to why he wrote her so often?
Well, it's true that Stan wrote a lot of letters to Betty Healy, but I wouldn't draw any conclusions by the number of letters to Betty that are in the archive. I think that Stan wrote just as many letters to many of the people that he corresponded with. The fact that there are so many Betty Healy letters is just an indication of those letters surviving intact such that they could be collected and put together into the archive. I think a lot of people are also interested in Betty Healy because she was the wife of Ted Healy, who of course was the founding member of the Three Stooges. And there are a couple of great letters where Stan talks about the Stooges, and I think for fans of comedy, those kinds of things are very, very unique. It's understandable that Stan would be talking about Chaplin, but I think that it's really a revelation when you can read Stan talking about Moe Howard, or Curly, or Shemp.
Now the sidebars at the website make for a very interesting read. One contains an interview with the film editor Burt Jordan. Another section has newspaper articles related to Stan. How do you find and then choose the material to put into these sidebars?
Well, Mike, the sidebars came about in this way. When I started inputting the letters, I realized that there were some things that Stan was talking about in each of his letters that required some explanation. For instance, if he mentioned a former actor, or if he mentioned something that was happening in the news of the day, I thought that it would help bring the story to life, explaining a little bit of what Stan's content related to when he was writing a letter in 1957, for instance, or in 1961. And I put those underneath the letters to help explain the content of Stan's words. I also have a very large collection of newspaper clippings, articles, and the like, interviews and things like that. It occurred to me that rather than just talk about specifically those things that Stan refers to in every letter, that it might be interesting to actually take articles that were written around the time that Stan was writing his letters about Stan, about the team, about the Roach lot, and build a sidebar that gave you a little bit of a historical news clipping timeline of the things that were going on in Stan's life in that particular period that you were reading the letters. For instance, when the Roach studio was being sold, I have a number of articles from the Los Angeles Times that are in the sidebar. You can look over at Stan's letters and see him commenting on the sale of the Roach lot. And I think that the combination of those things bring some historical significance to the events in that they were being relayed both by the news media and also by Stan in his letters.
One of the forum's moderators, Drew Smith, a while ago wanted me to ask you a couple questions. The first would be if having the website online has encouraged people to send in material as much as you would like, and secondly, have you ever considered the possibility of publishing the letters in a book?
Mike, I'm very happy with the number of people who have donated their letters to the archive, over 700 at last count. Some of them come individually from collectors who have their precious letter in their collection and want to share it with the rest of the world. Others come from the actual recipients. I've had some really, really kind donations from some really wonderful people who corresponded with Stan and wanted to share that correspondence with the world. I've always felt that the significance is when you take the letters and you put them together in chronological order for the first time, you start telling a story about how events that Stan relays in one letter are impacted by responses and other letters that he sends to those same people, maybe a week, a day, or a month later. And I think it's through that chronological arrangement of the letters that we start painting a really amazing picture of Stan and his life. As far as a book, it went through my mind briefly, just very briefly. And it was only because you're used to, especially in film fandom, have a book. But the fact that I do not have all of Stan's letters in one place right now prevents me from ever thinking that a book is feasible. And here's why. Tomorrow, if someone were to email me a letter and I were to add it to the archive, that letter would now tell another part of Stan's story. If a book was published, that letter would not be in the book. So the fact that the website could continue to grow as letters are added makes it a much more efficient vehicle than a book.